I was out on a camping trail in early spring with my dog Duke. Duke was a very young blue heeler, so medium-sized and very active. I was still training him on our hikes and everything, so I always chose very easy to navigate but far out, non-active trails. Sometimes they wouldn't even have a single review on any of the common trail apps or websites, but it was a lot easier to train Duke when nobody else was around. This camping spot we had hiked to was about 2 hours into the forest and seemed very unused. It was by far the most isolated feeling area that we'd been to. Duke did very well on the trail, and for the first few hours that we spent hanging around the camp. He had a ton of energy still, but I was tired, so once the sun went down, I got in the tent and tried to sleep. Duke, of course, was inside the tent with me, but after about 3 hours past sunset, he started to get very restless. Not like he just wasn't tired, but like he was anxious. I ended up having to unzip the tent and let him out, hoping maybe he just had to go use the bathroom. But when I stepped out with him, he didn't do anything. Duke kind of just circled around the camp, stopping every few seconds as if he was guarding the area. I'd never seen him do that before. I grabbed my flashlight and used it to look around, but there was nothing out there. I stayed out there with him for 30 minutes before bringing him back in. He really didn't want to, but he did eventually listen to me and get into the tent. The rest of that night was awful. Duke remained restless and awake, anxiously squirming in the tent all night. In the morning, I didn't even want to get up because of how tired I was. When we did leave the tent, Duke went right back to circling the campsite again, and while he did, I noticed some strange marks in the dirt behind the tent. It looked like maybe footprints, but hard to tell for sure, and if it was, then I couldn't be sure whether or not they were mine. When I started looking more, I saw that they were all around the campsite. Not a single one of the marks was a defined footprint though. It looked more like if you dragged your feet through the dirt, so that it didn't make an imprint. I felt like if it wasn't from me, then I would have noticed if they were there while I was setting up the camp yesterday. But I don't know. I sat down and made breakfast, watching the sun come up over the trees and warm up the forest, before taking Duke out for a morning walk. There were no paths, so we just walked between the trees in a random direction. A couple minutes in, Duke caught a scent. He was really drawn by it, moving fast and clearly following something. He went on for a minute or two, before stopping. He started sniffing around in the same area, going back and forth near the base of a tree, like he'd lost the scent all of a sudden. After a minute, and figuring it was just another animal, I called Duke back over and we started to head back to the campsite. That day, after getting back, everything felt different. The woods were eerily quiet, and I felt uneasy, like I was being watched. I was constantly looking over my shoulders and scanning the forest, looking between all the trees for any reason that could explain why I felt this way. Duke seemed very on guard too, not wanting to rest at all. He'd been like that for almost a full 24 hours by this point. And as it got later and the sun started going down, I could tell Duke was really exhausted. I made a campfire and tried to get Duke to lay down in the tent to get some rest so he didn't overwork himself. I could tell he was still fighting to keep his eyes open though. I sat by the fire, poking it and listening to the silence that filled the forest. The hours passed slowly. It was around 10 p.m. when suddenly Duke lifted his head like he'd heard something, and just when I looked over at him, a stick landed right in the campsite. I didn't see where it came from because I was looking at Duke. I looked up, but none of the trees really hung over the campsite, enough for it to have just fallen. Confused and fighting back the uneasy feelings, I stood up and picked up the stick, then looked around the forest. There wasn't anything out there. It was pitch black and still completely silent. And then another stick landed right in front of me, almost bouncing into the campfire. Someone had definitely thrown it. My heart started racing, and Duke came out of the tent still tired, but as soon as he stepped out, he was dead focused on something in the dark directly in front of me. I genuinely did not know what to do. "Hello? Who's out there?" I dug my flip knife out of my pocket and had it ready in my hand. There was probably 15 seconds of nothing, where the fear was just building up in me, before Duke started going crazy, barking, growling, and jumping back and forth aggressively. I looked down at him, and Duke was looking up. I followed his gaze to the tree right outside of our campsite, and about halfway up, there was a person looking down at us. He looked tall but thin, and was being completely still, like he didn't think we could see him. I took a few slow steps back, picking up my backpack and grabbing Duke by the collar, then continued to back up until reaching the trail. The figure stayed motionless, sitting in the tree for as long as I could see him. But when we got to the trail, I heard a thump. Sounded like him landing on the ground. Then there was a quick succession of leaves crunching, running up to the campfire. I saw him stop and stand right there in the light, watching us. I turned and started sprinting down the trail. Duke stayed right by my side. We eventually made it back to the trailhead and got away. That had to be the creepiest thing I'd ever experienced, and I honestly don't have a clue what that person was doing out there, or trying to do. The way he acted almost wasn't even human, like he was a feral animal, which just made it that much more disturbing. I think if I hadn't had brought Duke with me, that person would have done a lot worse than just stalking my campsite, and I probably wouldn't have made it out of that forest by the end of it. My name's Matt, and I'm 28. This happened 3 years ago. I live in a very small, older house on the outer portion of our town. My backyard backed up to the woods. Not a forest with trails or anything, but about a 15 square mile wooded area with nothing at all in it. I don't think anyone ever went in there. Anyway, I lived in that house for a full year, before one night I went out to sit on the porch for a while, and found a dog lying on my doorstep. It was huddled up right against the house next to the door, and looked terrified, shaking, and hungry. She was a border collie, and I wouldn't say I was the biggest dog person at the time, but I definitely felt really bad for her. I went back in and got a bowl of water and some leftover food, which she ate up immediately. Though every time I tried to get close to her, she was very hesitant. I thought she had to be someone's dog that ran away, and that the owners would come around looking at some point. I stayed outside with her for a while, probably an hour, before all of a sudden she perked up, then bolted off the porch, running into the dark and disappearing. That was my first encounter with her, but over the course of the following month, every single night I would find her lying on my porch again. I tried calling around for any animal care services to pick her up and help her, but she'd be gone before they ever had a chance to get her. And then, eventually, she trusted me enough to come inside my home, so I kept her there until the rescue team made it in the morning. I went with them to the vet, and seeing her so scared but feel safe near me, I couldn't let her go. I officially adopted her. I named her Grace and took her home. I kept an eye on her all day as she got used to the house, exploring the rooms and settling in. Still skittish, but a lot better than when I'd first found her. At night, I let her sleep on a pile of blankets in my room, and being exhausted from the whole day, I fell asleep almost immediately. In the middle of the night, about 2 a.m., I woke up to loud knocks echoing through the house. I quickly sat up and saw Grace cowering in the corner of the room, terrified and shaking just like she had been when I first found her on my porch. The knocking didn't stop. Someone was at my front door. I was very sleepy and tired, but what the hell could someone be doing here this late? I walked downstairs and up to the door. Grace didn't follow me. When I looked out, I didn't see anyone, but after a second, I saw a shadow move. Someone was on the far side of the porch, by the living room window, probably leaning against it and trying to look in. I was too scared to go to the window and look, so I stayed by the door and kept looking from there. But eventually I heard him leave from the side. I never got a chance to see who it actually was. I thought it was really creepy and extremely weird, so I stayed downstairs for a while to make sure he didn't come back. By 2:30, with no more signs of anyone, I went back upstairs. Grace looked calmer, but still seemed a bit shaken. I got in bed and slept until morning. That was the only time I had any visitors in the night, so for a while I never got an answer to who it was or what they wanted. However, over the next 2 weeks, Grace continued to have these strange episodes. Usually when I'd let her out in the backyard, which was fenced in, she'd be completely normal for a bit, before suddenly stopping, facing the woods behind the house, and freezing. It was almost always at night when letting her out just before bed, and I never saw anything. But Grace would stay frozen, sometimes for several minutes. She'd stare out there, standing in the middle of the yard, looking over the fence at the pitch-dark woods. Wouldn't react to my voice or even let me pull her back into the house. I'd have to literally pick her up and carry her, because she was so shaken up and terrified by whatever she was sensing out there. After it happened enough times, I knew that Grace had to be sensing something that was there, not just imagining it, and that whatever it was, it scared the hell out of her. But exactly 15 days after I'd officially brought her into my home, I let Grace out like usual that night, and again, she stopped and froze. I was watching her from the kitchen window, feeling sorry for her, but also feeling something different about this time. I don't know what it was, but something felt off. And then, after a minute, she suddenly bolted toward the fence, jumped over it, and fled into the woods. I immediately grabbed a flashlight and ran out there after her, without even giving myself a chance to think. Right when I got to the edge of the woods, I saw her way back in the trees, barely lit up by my flashlight. I called her name and ran toward her, but when I got closer, she ran deeper in. This kept happening, like she was purposefully waiting for me just to run further into the woods, like she was luring me somewhere. If I had to guess, I ran after her for 2 miles through the dark into the woods before she finally stopped and didn't run off. As I approached, my light started to pick up on something behind her. There was a cabin, or like a wooden shack, not well built, small, and very run down and decrepit, and I started to get really freaked out. But I knew Grace had to have led me here for a reason, and I thought this might give me some answers as to where Grace had come from all those weeks ago. So I pushed open the door. The hinges made the loudest creaking sound that resonated through the entire forest. Inside this wooden shack, it was basically empty, except for one thing. There was another dog. Different breed than Grace, much smaller. and it was tied to the wall. It looked just like Grace did when I'd first seen her, laying down, shaking and terrified. I went over and loosened the collar enough for it to slip out, but I was still really scared and unsure about what the hell was going on. I turned and looked back at Grace while I was thinking about what to do. She was frozen. I called her name, and she didn't move. Her head was facing into the trees, staring at the darkness. And then I started to hear it. Footsteps in the distance, walking toward us. I immediately picked up Grace and started running. The other dog followed, going back into the trees in the direction of my home. After a half mile, I put Grace down and she was able to run herself, and we eventually got back to the tree line of my backyard. However, when I turned around, the other dog was gone. I'm still pretty confident the dog got away though, and must have run off to somewhere else in the neighborhood. I got back inside and called the cops. The officers came that night for my report and went out the next day to investigate. The shelter was abandoned, more so than when I'd found it. No dogs there, and whoever the person was out there, he was gone as well. Ultimately, we never figured out what was really going on out there. But in the following days, I noticed Grace never had any more of those freezing episodes again. She never got scared or froze up in the backyard. So putting it all together, I think Grace knew that man, and could sense when he was close. And almost every night, he'd approach the backyard from the woods, making Grace freeze up in fear. I think he was looking for an opportunity to steal her back, but clearly I would never let that happen, not after seeing what I did. Anyway, 3 years later, she's doing great. Honestly, after those first strange few weeks, I couldn't have asked for a better dog. I don't think I'll ever really know what was going on out in the woods behind my house, but something tells me if I had not gone out there and found that shelter, that man would have continued to come up to my backyard every single night, and things might have not ended so well for both me or Grace. Last year, my sister and her fiance went for a trip overseas as part of their anniversary. They had a small dog named Piper, which they couldn't take with, so I offered to dog sit for them while they were away for a couple of weeks. The plus side of it was that I'd get to stay at their house for those 2 weeks, which was a very nice ranch home, sort of in the woods, but also still close enough to town for it to not feel isolated. Piper was the easiest dog in the world to dog sit. She lounged around all day, never barked or whined, and just liked to follow me wherever I went. I had a remote job at the time, so it made the whole thing even better. I'd set up my laptop on a small desk in the bedroom, and Piper would sleep on the bed behind me while I worked. The first few days went very well, and on Friday, I had a call with my sister to make sure everything was good, and aside from that, me and Piper hung around watching TV all night. When I let her outside before bed, though, I did notice she was a little more hesitant than usual. The house didn't have a fence around it. It was just a huge yard with some trees and bushes. Piper stayed right by the house, quickly doing her business and running back in. No sniffing or hanging around like she usually would do. I chalked it up to there likely being coyotes or something nearby. However, just 10 minutes later, while I was in the shower getting ready for bed, I heard the doorbell ring downstairs. It only rang once, but I was absolutely sure it was the doorbell I'd heard. I quickly finished up and got dressed, then went downstairs to check the front door. No one was out there, and from what I could see, it didn't look like there were any cars parked in the driveway either. It was a little past 10 o'clock, so I really did not know why someone had come up to the house this late, especially to a house out here. After a minute, I started to walk back upstairs, and just when I did, I heard something outside. Piper was right next to me and started whining, which she almost never does, and a couple seconds later, the doorbell rang again. This time, when I looked out, there was a guy there. I watched him through the peephole for a moment. Ashley? Ashley, you home? Hello? He started calling out my sister's name, and weirdly, I felt like he kind of looked familiar. I felt like I'd seen him before, but I didn't know when or where. I opened the door just a crack. The man looked at me with a straight face, then looked down at Piper, and then back up at me before giving a fake smile. Hey, is Ashley home? No, she's not. Do you know her? Why are you here so late anyway? He nodded and apologized, saying he was just a friend stopping by because he was in the area. As I was processing the strange situation, I noticed how eerily quiet it was outside, and I actually was able to see his car sitting in the dark far back on the driveway. Something really didn't seem right. The guy knelt down and started saying hi to Piper, but I put my leg out to block Piper from leaving and to keep him from touching her. It's pretty late, and like I said, Ashley isn't home right now. Maybe send a text next time. He seemed unpleased with that answer, and offended that I wouldn't let him get close to Piper, but he said alrighty and started to walk off. I'll let her know you stopped by, I said as I started closing the door. As soon as I said that, the man paused for a moment, like he was going to say something, but then he just continued to walk. I closed and locked the door, then watched him walk all the way down the driveway and get into his car. I pulled my phone out and started to text my sister, but I realized I never even got his name, so I just let her know that some guy showed up asking about her. I knew she probably wouldn't respond for 3 or 4 hours because of the time difference where she was, so I didn't bother waiting. And after that, I went back upstairs and got in bed. Despite the unusual encounter, I fell asleep within 20 minutes. The next time my eyes opened, I knew it was in the middle of the night still. The room was pitch black. I reached for my phone to check the time, but as I was feeling around for it, I couldn't find it. And before I could really get up to look, I heard Piper whine. This immediately had me worried because Piper rarely ever made any noise, so I knew something was wrong. I turned and looked to the other side of the room by Piper's dog bed. I could hardly see anything. All I could see was movement in the darkness. I jumped out of bed and ran to the lights. Literally just 5 feet next to the bed, there was a man reaching down to pick up Piper. She was trying to move away, but he grabbed her before she could. The guy didn't even seem worried about me seeing him, and even though he was covered in black clothing, I could tell it was the same man that was at the front door earlier. He turned and faced me, still holding Piper, and told me to move. I was standing in the doorway, of course not going to let him leave with the dog. He didn't seem to have any weapons at all, but he was a pretty big dude, and he looked really pissed off. I told him to put the dog down and I'd let him leave without any issue. His face didn't change, like he had no emotion other than anger. He started walking toward me, and I realized I had to do something, so I just tried ramming my shoulder into him while reaching for Piper. It kinda worked. I got beat up pretty bad, but was able to get the dog, and after a minute of struggle, he suddenly just got up and ran. After cops came by, and a long call with my sister using the cop's phone, because the guy did actually steal my phone, I was able to describe the man enough from our interaction at the front door to get an identity. It was my sister's ex-boyfriend from 4 years ago. They briefly had a thing for about 5 or 6 months, and I'd never actually met the guy. I'd only seen a few pictures, which is why he kind of looked familiar. The strange thing is that they didn't have any contact over the last 4 years, so why this happened all of a sudden is crazy. After a warrant for his arrest was out for a week, the cops finally caught him by tracking my phone. Supposedly, he'd been stalking her house for a while, and his plan was to steal Piper to use as some sort of ransom to force my sister to get back together with him. Absolute psychopath for even considering that that would work. I still can't believe how quietly he had broken inside and snuck into the bedroom while I was sleeping. I mean, he could have just killed me right there if he wanted to. Thankfully, everyone, including Piper, was okay though.